Thank you to all our students and youth organizations from across the world behind and supporting this initiative. Thank you for keeping the climate cause alive, especially in this crucial time that we need climate leadership and action from all nations and people. This is a testament of our intergenerational responsibility in addressing the intensifying effects of the climate crisis. I am Loren Legarda. I come from the Philippines, where I serve now as district representative of the Lone District of Antique and Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. I have been a legislator since 1998, where I served in the Philippine Senate of only 24 senators elected nationally all over the country. In 2007 again, and in 2013, for 3 terms of 6 years, and now serving my first term in the House of Representatives. Before that, I was a broadcast journalist producing television shows on the environment, women and children's causes, and climate change issues way back in the 1980s and 1990s. As a legislator, I've authored several laws on climate action and environmental protection. I've also supported and initiated and financed projects and programs for the rights and welfare of our indigenous peoples, for women and children, for marginalized and vulnerable sectors in our community. The Philippines is considered a pioneer in terms of environment and climate legislation, passing laws way ahead of its time and regarded as a model for other countries. But we know we still need to do more in terms of actual effective and efficient implementation of these policies as the impacts of climate change become more severe and devastating, especially for a highly vulnerable country like the Philippines. I am recording this message as the Philippines reels from 3 powerful typhoons: Typhoon Quinta, international name Molave, Rolly or Goni, and Ulysses or Vamco, each just days apart from each other, had claimed thousands of lives and destroyed immeasurable livelihoods and submerged communities, barangays, local governments, municipalities, and provinces in neck-deep floodwater. As this message gets broadcast to all viewers around the world, there would still be millions of Filipinos seeking shelter and relief in evacuation centers. The floodwaters may have subsided by this time in some areas, but I'm afraid they won't be able to return to their normal lives in the foreseeable future. The devastation has just been astounding. One region in the Philippines experienced what a scientist described as a once in a 100-year flood scenario, and the region experienced a similar level of flooding within less than a year before. Along the eastern coastline of this region is a long mountain range called the Sierra Madre, which acts as a natural buffer against tropical cyclones and the rains they bring. But considering the back-to-back typhoons in the last month, the Sierra Madres could only soak up so much water from the storms to protect the local communities that have relied on this mountain range for decades. The estimated worth of damage to our infrastructure and agriculture from these typhoons is over 25 billion pesos, or around 518 million US dollars. We all know, however, that the cost of rebuilding the infrastructure and the lives and livelihoods of the affected communities will entail significantly much more than that. This is why, in terms of the Global Climate Risk Index, the Philippines has consistently ranked the highest among countries vulnerable to climate impacts because of our peculiar vulnerability of being we're currently affected by catastrophes. And I quote, "But it's not just tropical cyclones that we endure and cope with. Last year, 51 of our local governments declared a state of calamity due to droughts and dry spells induced by El Nino, aggravated by climate change. The estimated damage to our agriculture in just the first quarter of 2019 amounted to 168 million US dollars, affecting the lives of more than 247,000 Philippine farmers. Episodic climate-induced disasters and weather extremes, unfortunately, form only one subset of the threats our people are facing. Another involves slow onset effects, which take place without the drama of calamity but are likely to inflict lasting harm to our country's economic aspirations. These involve rising sea levels and ocean acidification, as well as serious and more frequent temperature stresses in our seas that result in coral bleaching. As a developing nation, we have limited resources to lift the lives of our fellow countrymen. The resources that we pour for recovery from these climate impacts could have been used for other urgent needs, especially now that we are grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, which altogether has its own immediate challenges to our communities. These resources could have been invested more in our education sector, in health, social welfare, transport, and even energy sectors to benefit the present and the future generations. I've served as chairman of the Committee on Finance for many years in the Philippine Senate, and I've facilitated and recommended changes to our government's national budget. I know the value of allocating funds and prioritizing projects and programs that would build the resilience of our vulnerable communities to these climate impacts. I mention this because as you all gather in this Mock COP26, there must be a clear expression of support for developing nations that will improve their adaptive capacities to climate impacts. Highly vulnerable developing countries like ours contribute so little to global warming and climate change, and yet we are the ones severely affected by it. We need to make the developed and highly industrialized nations accountable to the global warming and climate crisis that they have caused. We need to demand that they deliver on the commitments they pledged in the Paris Agreement. First, developed nations must significantly reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to limit global warming to only 1.5 degrees Celsius. This 1.5 degrees climate goal is a threshold of survival that the Philippines and other vulnerable nations fought for during negotiations of the Paris Treaty way back in 2015. This is particularly crucial this year as a deadline of the submission of the nationally determined contributions, or NDC, by all parties in the Paris Agreement is this year, the midnight of December 31, our midnight survival deadline. We are, of course, looking at developed countries to submit the NDCs that exhibit greater ambition and greater action to help limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is all about making the necessary sacrifices now. What gives me hope is a growing number of countries that have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050 and 2060. These include Japan, the European Union, and recently the US, under the administration of incoming President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. But we need to be vigilant that they actually walk their talk and that they actually commit to their pledges beyond lip service and commitments. Many say that our youth will be the leaders of tomorrow. What they fail to realize is that our youth are already the leaders of today. I see that in the actions and protests of Greta Thunberg and many like her who have inspired many climate movements across the globe. I also see that now in this Mock COP26 as a youth-led virtual conference alternative to the traditional COP, you have my support. And I really hope that the outcome of this event will inform the UNFCCC COP26 next year. I hope that our world leaders will listen to you as our youth who have just as much stake, rather an even higher stake on the future of humanity and our planet. Many will easily dismiss this perspective and the actions, sometimes from our youth, but there are many more of us here who believe in you, in your energy, in your passion, your creativity, and your skill, and your resourcefulness to instigate positive change in our society to last for generations to come. I hope for your success in this event.